Thankful for this opportunity. Let me reiterate, next Sunday at 10 o'clock will be our worship service. We'll cut this hair down just a little bit. It's hot up here on the stage. We'll have a worship service at 10 o'clock. We will all be together. What? It's working. And then we will have a meal at 11, from 11 to 12. And then from 12 to 2, we will have our open house. So please make a note of that. I'll announce that again before we get out of here. I know we've been saying 9:30, but we changed it because we are going to have a meal at 11. And we have some in our communities that are connected in other churches in different places who want to come out. So we changed it to between 12 and 2. So anyway, that's what we're going to do. It'll all start next Sunday at 10, and then next Sunday night at 6 o'clock we'll have a singing. So it's kind of an all-day affair or celebration, so we want you to come out and be with us. We'll have a great time together. This morning, the title of the sermon is This Side of Impossible. And the reason we want to talk about this today is because it seems like there's this odd place it seems like our faith tends to take us. It's a place that's hard to live, to be honest with you. It's a place of where we're caught between what we can do and what we ask God to do for us. You know, it's this place of where we try to step out beyond what our abilities will allow us to do. But in order to do that, God's power and ability has to step in at that spot. And it's this transition of where you truly begin to lean on your faith and you really begin to trust and depend on this divine nature of God, a God that can do anything, a God that's bigger than all of us, bigger than our problems, that can change the unchangeable, that can mend the broken, that can restore, repair, and all of these wonderful things that are beyond us. It's hard to live in a place of where you are confined to your own limitations, but then your faith declares this all-powerful God. It's a tough place to live. And in reality, that's where most of us live. Most of us live in a place of where we get caught in between. And because it's such a hard place to live on the edge of where we're expecting God to do something, a lot of times we just kind of retreat back into the world of where our own limits are there. You know, where it's things within our power, things within our control. And so our faith has a lot of bark, but it doesn't have a lot of bite. You know, our faith is very vocal about how good He is and about how great He is and about how big and strong He is. And then we live in a place of where we just depend on ourselves. It would be good to be able to live in that place of where you depend fully upon Him and who He is as you declare who He is. And I know for myself personally, I find myself living in that place a lot. You know, I find myself where my faith makes these declarations about who He is and what He can do. But each and every day I live within the full limits of myself. You know, each day I live within this world of what I can do and what I can figure out and what I can put together. And so while our faith pushes us past what we can do, we're so reluctant to go past that possible stage, that line there that we draw, and live where we're depending and we're trusting on Him. And that's one of the things about the Bible that's so fascinating are the characters in the Bible and the choices they make. The choices that they make when they choose to live in a place that's beyond what they're capable of doing. They choose to live in a place of where that if God doesn't intervene, there's going to be this tragedy unfold. You know, they make conscious choices just to see the power of God. You know, some of the choices they make that unveils God's power and God's authority really doesn't have anything to do with the great war that's raging, or it doesn't have anything to do with this monumental moment in their life that's going to change the direction of history or time. Sometimes it's just to see if God will. Sometimes it's just to see if God can. Sometimes it's just to see if that's really Him there. And so they make these choices to where they know they will never be able to determine if God is truly there if they live within their own limits. They know that they'll never really be able to determine who God is and what God is if they live within this world that they are capable of accomplishing. So they make choices to live beyond that. They make choices to go beyond that. They make choices to step out into a place of where if God doesn't intervene and His divine nature doesn't come through, there's going to be this terrible trouble unfold in their life. So what we want to ask today and what we want to talk about today is pushing us out past the place of our own accomplishments, pushing us out past the place of our own abilities, and living in a place of where if God doesn't hold us up, then we just simply fall. So we're going to read you some scripture here in a minute of a couple of accounts throughout the Bible of where believers in the Bible, be it the Old Testament or the New Testament, make these conscious choices about living in a place that's so far beyond their abilities. One of the stories in the Bible that has always fascinated me, and it wasn't necessarily one of my favorite stories growing up, but as I've grown up over the years, it has rapidly become one of my favorite stories. It's in John. And there's a passage there at the beginning of John of where Jesus is kind of introducing himself to some of his disciples, and he's beginning to call them. In one particular place of where he begins to call the disciples, there's this Nathaniel and Philip story of where one of them was under the fig tree, and Jesus shows up, and he begins to tell him everything about him. He says, I know you're this, and I saw you here, and this, that, or the other. It's that place of where Nathaniel says, is there anything good that can come out of Bethlehem or Nazareth? Is there anything good that can come out of Nazareth? So Jesus shows up and he begins to talk to Nathaniel. Nathaniel says, well, obviously you are the Son of God. Jesus' response is taken back a little bit, and he says, you think I'm the Son of God because I know your name. He says, if you'll follow me and you'll walk where I walk, he said, you'll see greater things than that happen. He says, if you'll follow me, you'll see angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. In other words, Jesus is telling Nathaniel that if you'll come follow me, I will truly show you who I am. If you think I'm the Son of God because I said this, wait till you see what's coming. Wait till you see what's coming. And I really believe there was a point in all of our lives of where that moment captured us. There was a moment in all of our lives where we said, yes, this is the Son of God. For some of us, it might have been a Sunday morning at a church service. For some of us, it might have been a revival service. It may have been some type of camp meeting. For me personally, at 9 years old, it was beside my grandmother's bed. When I knelt down and she prayed with me and I said, this is the Son of God. Now, the call then was no different than it was for Nathaniel. If you'll follow me, I will truly reveal to you who I am. But along life's way, it seems like we have a tendency to, while we make that declaration in that moment, somewhere along the line, if we're not careful, we slip back into a comfortable place of where we're not seeing who He is. You know, we're not seeing this divine hand. We're not seeing these God-only moments where only He could do it. And so as I've grown up, I've really fell in love with that story because it's an invitation to the broken people to follow and watch, follow and see and experience. And I know there's been many things in my life and many times in my life where I needed a divine act in this moment. There's been so many things in my life and so many events and moments in my life where if God doesn't do something, it's not going to get done. It was so much bigger than me. It was so much out of my control. It was beyond what I could grasp, especially early on in life and starting off and going off to college and getting married and family and one thing then another. There were just so many things that was so much bigger than me. That was just on my best day, I couldn't control them. And so there was this tendency to truly lean on these things of where we follow Him and we need these divine moments and these divine hands in our life. And I wonder, when was the last time you found yourself in a place of where you truly needed the divine nature of God in that moment. You needed His ability. You needed Him to change the course of this employment situation. You needed Him to change the direction of whatever it is that's unfolding in your life. And you need this divine moment in hand in your life. Well, like I said, I've fallen in love with that Nathaniel story because there's been a declaration in my life that I believe this is who he is. And then there's this invitation to all these broken men and these broken women to follow me, and you'll really see who I am. When was the last thing that unfolded in your life and you said this had to be God that did this? If this had to be His hand. So I'm going to read you a couple of stories. And all through the Bible, there are these statements like I'm going to read to you out of Luke, out of the first chapter of Luke. There's all types of statements where Jesus says, when He's talking about the difficulties of a rich man entering into heaven, as it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, and His disciples respond and say, well, who then can be saved? And Jesus responds, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And then in Luke 1 we have this reading. It says, for with God nothing will be impossible. All through the Gospels, this is there. All through the Gospels, there's this running theme with Jesus that nothing is impossible. And as people of faith who have claimed to follow Him and follow Him every step of the way, then that means we ought to see the impossible done on a regular basis. For with God, nothing's impossible. We need to see the impossible within our homes done. We need to see the impossibles with our employment done. We need to see the impossible within our church done. We need to see these things done because Jesus clearly invites us into a world of where the impossible is accomplished. He invites us all through the New Testament. There's this invitation to follow me and watch. Follow me in your broken condition and watch. Follow me in this broken world and watch. Follow me in all of these situations that's bigger than you, that's bigger than everything that you know, and watch. And He makes this declaration, not just in the Gospels, but even in the following letters that Paul writes about this God that can do absolutely anything. And so we have a tendency to walk around talking about how good He is and about how great He is and what He can do. But then there's a reluctancy to live in a place of where we see these things done. Walk with Him in these places of where these things are done. One I want to read to you it's an Old Testament story, and you know it well. It's the David and Goliath story. David takes on this battle. David was obviously very confident in his own ability. David was very confident that Goliath wouldn't get close enough to him to kill him. I believe David fully believed with all that he was that he had everything he needed to destroy this giant. But at the same time, he knew that what he was dealing with and what he was facing was bigger than him. So there's this moment in this story after David goes down to the creek and he picks up 5 smooth stones and he puts in his pouch and he has this conversation with the king. The armor doesn't fit. He shakes it off. And finally we're at the place of where David enters into this valley with Goliath, and they're standing there face to face, and Goliath is a good distance away, and right before Goliath begins to charge David and kick off this battle that's about to unfold, David makes this declaration. David says ultimately this. He says, this battle is not mine, but it's God's. David identifies this idea that he is standing in a place of where if God doesn't do it, he won't be able to. David identifies that he has followed long enough, and he has followed close enough, and he has walked far enough that he has found himself in a situation where if God doesn't provide a victory in this moment, that David's not going to make it out of this valley alive. And so he declares that this battle belongs to God. Now here's the part about this that I like. David knows that's where he's going, and he goes anyway. David knows that if he follows this long enough, he's eventually going to end up in a place of where God needs to do the impossible. He knows that if he follows him close enough, and if he is faithful long enough, eventually the day is coming of where he is standing face to face with Goliath. And David chooses to go there. He chooses to go there because he is confident, not just in his own abilities, but he is confident that God's going to do the impossible. And that's why I said earlier, we have a tendency to linger back a little bit in that world of where we're in control. Linger back in that world of where our abilities is enough. linger back in that place of where our wisdom is enough or our strength is enough. And we tend to live in that place. And it's an odd place to live when our faith makes this declaration and we live here. When our faith declares this and then we live in a place of where we never see this divine hand unfold in our life. We never follow close enough to where we're in that place of where we say, this battle's not mine. We don't walk far enough. We don't follow close enough to where we look up one day and we realize that if God doesn't do something, because I'm telling you, if you're a person of faith and you're following Him, you will eventually end up in this place of where you say, if God doesn't do this, I can't do it. Let me read you the passage real quick. It's fairly simple. It's 1 Samuel 17. And this is David's declaration to Goliath. He says, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and this day I will strike you down, cut off your head, and give the carcasses of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the creatures of the earth. It says, then the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. It says, and all of those assembled there will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and He will give all of you into our hands. Now, without diving into the details of this fight and this battle, the part that captures me concerning what we're talking about today is this conscious decision that David makes. David doesn't accidentally stumble into the valley with Goliath. He chooses to walk in there. David doesn't just look up one day and he finds this giant breathing down on him to where he's going to have to fight him. Days before this, David is deciding to voluntarily take himself into a place of where God has to move in this moment. Now, we are so good at protecting ourselves and surrounding ourselves with all these defense mechanisms that we stay a long way from places like this if we can. Places like this, we're out of control. Places like this is dependent on something bigger and something greater than us. And so we fight to stay away from these places. We plan and we have strategies and we do all of these things to prevent us from being in a place of where we don't know the outcome. But days before this ever happened, David decided that he would go to a place where if God doesn't do this, he's not going to make it out. When was the last time in your faith you made a decision like that? When was the last time you decided to put yourself in a place where if God doesn't, then you can't? Let me read you one more. And this is along that same line. This is the place of where Jesus is walking on water. And he invites Peter to walk on water with him. It says, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side. While he dismissed the crowds, and after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long ways away from the land. It says, beaten by the waves, for the winds was against them, and in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it is a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. It says, then Peter answered him, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you and walk on water. Command me to come to you on the water. He said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and he walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. So one of the things about this story that is interesting is, number one, Peter didn't have to walk on water. He didn't have to. The rest didn't. They stayed in the boat. And they still declared Jesus was Savior. Peter didn't have to, but he chose to. Jesus didn't make Peter get out of the boat. The boat wasn't sinking. There was no purpose. There was no purpose for Peter to step out of the boat to walk on water other than for Peter to know that this was Jesus. That was it. Peter is at the conclusion. He says, if this is really you, let me come to you. And Jesus' response was come. So as David beforehand voluntarily, days in advance, makes this decision to walk down in this valley and fight Goliath, Peter in that moment decides that in order for him to determine that this is truly Jesus, then he needs to walk on water. And this is the only purpose that he steps out of the boat, is just to know if this is Jesus. Jesus calls him to this world of where the impossible is done. He invites him to step out of the boat and do what normally he couldn't do, just so that he would know that this is Jesus. I think there's a lot of times we find ourselves in these places. We find ourselves in these places, in these situations, these very unique opportunities of where He is inviting us to know who He is through this divine work or this impossible thing that He's inviting or offering to do for us. But so many of us, like the disciples that stay in the boat, are more comfortable watching from a distance than we are getting up close. You know, it's one thing for us personally to live our life that declares that God can do anything and then not see it through. It's a totally different thing for a body of faith to make a declaration in who God is and then never walk in a place where only He can carry us. Never stand in a place of where truly, and there are congregations everywhere that is terrified to put themselves in a place to see if this is really Jesus. They're scared to death to move 1 inch forward or to the side because it demands that they depend on Him. And like I said before, we will work very hard to not put us into a situation where we're facing a giant or not put us into a situation where we must keep our eyes on Him. We'd rather be in the boat where we can look anywhere we want to and still stay afloat. We'd be much more comfortable sitting beside somebody in the boat, being able to watch the world around us unfold and still stay afloat. The place that Jesus invites us to demands that we keep our eyes on Him if we're going to stay above the water. That's why I said earlier, it's a complicated place to live. But if you're going to know who He is, you have got to see the divine hand unfold in your life more than that one time. You've got to say, and you know, I can remember, I've told you these stories before. I was about to go off to college, and I didn't have a place to live, and classes were about to start in a week or so, and me and Mama, we tear off down to Tuscaloosa, and I prayed about it beforehand, and it was that moment of where, if you're God, you got to do this. So we go down there, and we finally stumble into this place, and this lady says, you're the one here for the apartment. And I said, that's me. I'm the one here for the apartment. So we rent this apartment, we go back, and in that moment, there wasn't a doubt in my mind who resolved that. Now, some people would say, well, if you'd have planned and you'd have done this prior, been a little bit more responsible, blah, 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 you wouldn't have been in that situation. Well, I'm telling you, I'd rather stand right there and know that's who that is than to walk away knowing that I'm smart enough to handle this. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for doing everything that we possibly can. But there was no reasonable reason for Peter to step out of the boat other than just to go to Jesus. I don't know why we think when it concerns Him that everything has to be functioning and reasonable. Sometimes you just got to be in a place with Him. Sometimes you just got to step out to be with Him. There's a story in the Bible where the woman has the alabaster box and she breaks it and she anoints Jesus and she cries. And the disciples, one of them says, we could have sold this and we could have done this with us. And Jesus stops that complaint and He says that she's done this for me. She's done this for me. It may not make sense to anybody else, and there may not be no reasoning behind it to you, but she's done this for me. There may not have been any reason for Peter to get out of the boat and walk to Jesus, but for Peter, there was. Listen, if you're trying to live this life of faith or make these remarkable declarations, and you never find yourself in that place of where the battle belongs to Him and not you, or you never find yourself in a place of where He is inviting you to live in a world where you can't stand but only through Him. If you're a person of faith, you are going to have to go to these places to truly see who He is. Think about it for just a moment. This is one of the conversations that I miss with my dad more than any other conversations. It's these conversations of, here's what God did. You know, we would have these type conversations, sometimes weekly, but we would at least have a couple a month where we would talk about, here's what God did. You know, and he would tell me something about going on in his church or the life of somebody in his congregation, and I would talk about something in my family or something within our life or the life of the congregation. But there was this idea of it's okay to live in that place of where you're dependent on the divine hand of God. I don't know if I want to declare my faith in God and then live in a world that fully depends on my ability. I don't know if I want that. I don't think I can do that. I don't know if I want to say the God that I serve is all-powerful and all-knowing and then live this life confined to my own limitations. If you're okay with that, I'm not okay with that. And I certainly don't want to be a part of a congregation that says God can do anything, and then we never ask Him to do anything. We never need Him to do anything because we haven't moved in months. We need to be in a place where we can see His powerful divine hand unfolding in our life. And as we said earlier, the way that happens is you just follow Him long enough. You'll look up one day to where you're fully dependent on Him to win this battle. Listen, this morning, I don't know what you're facing or what you're dealing with or what you have dealt with or what's going on. But I'm wondering if you're in a place of where if God doesn't, it can't be done. If you're in a place today of where if God doesn't redirect, if God doesn't change, if God doesn't reveal Himself as the divine power that He is, then trouble's coming, or tragedy or failure or something's coming. Listen, this morning, He tells us all through the Bible that that's where you see who He is. It's in those places. So we're gonna give you an opportunity to pray. Jennifer, if y'all want to come on around. We're going to give you an opportunity to pray this morning. You know what it is you're wrestling with and what it is you're dealing with, and you know the struggles, and you know where you're at right now. And if you find yourself at a very impossible place and situation, you also find yourself with an opportunity to truly see who He is. If it's employment, if it's personal matters, if it's finance, if it's family, whatever it is, if you're in an impossible place, this is a great time to say, this is yours. This is yours. I need you to do this. I need you to help me stand in these rough waters. I need you to bring down this giant that's in front of me. I need you to do this. And it being before an impossible place for a person of faith is not necessarily the end of the world. It's a great opportunity to really see how big your God is. You know, and like I said before, the only reason Peter walked on water was just to see who Jesus was. That's the only reason he stepped out. And apparently with Jesus is okay with that. So this morning, He may be inviting you to stand in an impossible place. He may be inviting you to see Him change your situation. He may be inviting you to see Him change you. He may be inviting you to whatever the case might be. But I assure you, He can do it. Stand to your feet. We're going to have a word of prayer, then we'll invite you to come pray. Father, we thank You for this time together and for the opportunity to be here this morning. Lord, we thank You for helping us and for allowing us to know You. And Lord, I pray that throughout this congregation this morning, You know the battles that are represented here today. Father, You know the ones who are standing in an impossible place right now, needing You to raise them up, to strengthen them, whatever the situation is. Lord, I pray right now that we turn to You. God, I pray that we turn to You completely and wholly, and we ask and we trust and we depend on Your divine hand in these moments, these hard places. And Father, I pray that in these moments we see You better than we've ever seen You before. And we ask this in Christ's name. Amen. As they sing, I invite you to come pray.
My soul will rest.